The brake pads on my first generation Chevy Volt, the rear brake pads fell off their backing plate and scored the rotor pretty badly. So I had to run out and get pads immediately to kind of do an emergency brake pad repair. And I was able to order a new rotor online, so I'm going to be replacing that today. The first thing I'll do before taking the tire off is I'm going to crack the nuts on the wheel with a 19mm socket on a breaker bar, and this is just to get them loosened up just a tad so that it's easier to take off when the car is in the air. So just like that. I'll do that for all of them. The Chevy Volt service manual shows to put the service jack. It shows the service jack location as right underneath the rear spring support, right there. And so that's where I have it set up underneath on the wheel that I'm going to work on. And I think it's easiest to approach this from the rear of the car because I'm going to put a jack stand at the lifting location. Here are the service jack locations from the service manual if you want to pause the video here and study them. From underneath, I was able to position the jack right underneath that spring support, so I'll remove my hand and start lifting. Here's the close-up of the service jack location at the rear from the service manual. From the rear of the car, the service manual shows the lifting location as right here at this pinch weld. So that's after I get it jacked, I'm going to put the jack stand right under here. Here are the lifting points that it shows in the service manual again if you want to pause the video. This will be a good time to chock the wheels. I'm going to use some scrap 4x4s, keep them chocked while lifting, and then afterwards I'll make sure they're still tight after the car is lifted. Now with the car lifted with the service jack, the hydraulic jack, I'll be able to position that jack stand right underneath the pinch weld, right like that. Then I'll lower that down onto the jack stand. And then even with the car sitting on the jack stand at the lift point, I'm still going to leave the hydraulic jack just underneath that spring support, just in case. So I got the jack stand underneath that pinch point, the lifting point, and then I'm not using my second jack stand right now, so I have it next to it just kind of as another little fail-safe. So then I'll take off the tire, kind of give it a little push, feels pretty good. So I just have a regular impact gun. I'll take a 1/2-inch socket adapter. I'll be able to pop these off. Take the wheel. Slide it right there, just in case. So before I take off the rotor, because I went through the brake pad replacement kind of quickly, I didn't do the full hardware inspection that the service manual suggests. So I'm going to take off the caliper also and the brake pads and then re-lubricate everything. So there's 2 guide pin bolts, one up here, that's a 10mm, and then down here there's a dampener. So you have to get on that with 2 adjustable wrenches, one here, one there. So I'll start by actually taking off the top. Kind of awkward to get to, but I loosened that a little bit before we started filming. So I'll loosen that up. Okay. And then, like I said, you have to get down on this with 2 adjustable wrenches, but that's really it. And this will come right out. Okay, 1, 2. Now put them aside, remembering that the damper's on the bottom. So I should be able to kind of maneuver caliper off. I'll leave it right like that for now because I have to hang this out of the way. I don't want it resting on the brake hoses. So there's not a great spot to hang this here. So I'm going to get some 12 gauge scrap 12 gauge wire, kind of slide that right up there, and then with that off I'll be able to kind of that up and around. And that won't look pretty, but it'll hold it out of the way. Let's take the brake pads out and the hardware clips. I'm gonna reuse these because they're new. I don't want to mess them up. And I'm going to put these aside while I take off the caliper mounting bracket. And there's 2 bolts back here that I'll show you. There are 2 caliper bracket bolts, one right here and then one right down here. And they are 15 millimeter. So I have a 15 millimeter socket on my breaker bar just to break them loose. Here are the bracket bolt locations shown from the service manual, if you want to pause the video. And then with them broken, being just cracked loose, I'll ratchet the bolts out. And these caliper mounting bolts, per the service manual I was able to buy online, these are torque to yield, so you have to throw these out and buy new ones, and I'll link a product number. If you want to pause the video and write down this part number, these are the rear caliper mounting bracket bolts for the first generation Chevy Volt. Here's the old one side by side with the new one. You have to buy 2 of these. It's an M12 with a 1.75 thread pitch, and yeah, these are torque to yield, so you have to throw them out. And the reason I wanted to take all this off is because these caliper guide pins, so this one moves fairly freely, but this one is pretty tight. I'm kind of forcing that, so I want to take these out and lubricate them. I'll show you that in a little bit. Take off the rotor. The rotor's held in place with it's a Torx bolt. It's a T30. So to take this will move at this point, so you kind of have to kind of lock this into place. And there we go. And the baby's in there. That's stripped. Straight up stripped. Okay, I'll have to drill that out. Drill this out, you're going to want to get a bimetal bit. And I already drilled through once, and then I've always found that the easiest way to do this is to just keep progressing up a bit size until you've pretty much drilled through the entire screw. Oh, there you go. That broke it. And then kind of got lucky. The rotor wasn't seized onto the hub here, so got lucky in that regard. Now I should be able to knock this out. I don't have to reuse that screw. All that does is hold the rotor into place while you're working on it. So what I'm going to do next is clean this up with a wire brush. This is just a photo from the service manual showing the procedure to remove the rotor. And this shows that you should clean out the hub with a wire brush. I'm going to clean this off right here so that the rotor can mate to this really nice and flush. And I'm going to pay attention to Chevys. warnings about brake dust, so I'm going to put a mask on. And I think it's worth it to have one of these wire brush bits for your drill. Makes this a lot faster than just using a wire brush, and you're not going to deform any metal here. So if you just get the threads of the bolts, get around the back too. And then I'm also going to hit that with some brake parts cleaner. Careful not to get this everywhere, but I already did. The new rotor part number is here if you want to pause the video. This is the OEM rotor, and I want to take this out and just make sure it's the same as the other rotor. I already checked this out. It is the same, and it's nice they have this anti-rust coating on this one that you'll have to break in. And still a good idea to clean this off. The service manual says to clean this off because there might be some oil on here that was shipped with the rotor. So I'll just do that, and I'll clean it off, and I'll make sure this is nice and dry by the time I put the brake pads on there. Okay, so that is nice and clean. And I'm gonna line this up with the screw hole, even though I don't have that screw anymore. One trick here is to take one of the lug nuts and if you take that lug nut and thread it down, it's the same as that screw. That screw really just holds it into place until the caliper is on and the wheel is on. If you're able to reuse your disc bolt, here are the torque specs on it, 80 pound-inches. All right, now I have the caliper bracket. I just wire brushed this down. And remember, it's best practice to lubricate these caliper guide pins. So I'm gonna take the rubber off of them, and I'll clean that off with a clean towel. But for these guide pins, clean them off, and then I'll re-lubricate them. And I'm going to use silicone brake parts lubricant. That's what the service manual recommends. This is a high temperature lubricant, and this is a lubricant that will not degrade these rubber springs here. So let's get the old grease off of there. Remember, this is the bottom. Clean that out. Side. Looks pretty good. Then take that silicone lubricant, and I don't need a lot of this. I'll just give it a good coating. Slide that right in there. Put the washer back on. And better. Same here. Get that lubricant on there. That's probably a lot. Okay, then, all right, and then I will reinstall the mounting bracket. Caliper bracket bolts. I'm going to add some thread locking compound. This is Permatex thread locker, and you just put a little bit at the base of these threads. That's all you need to do. And then what I'm going to do is hold that bracket up there and then just kind of get this bolt started. And do the same with the other. Just a little bit at the base, and that's probably a lot. Then get that started. Then I'll get out the ratchet. I will tighten these and then torque them down to spec. The spec is 2 passes. The first is to 67 foot-pounds and then an additional 60 degrees. Tecton's a 3/8 torque wrench. This is the 24-330 with a 15mm socket, and then you loosen this nut here, and then you see 65 with the line there. You can get 0 onto that. That's at 65, and then 2 more there. That's 67 foot-pounds. Tighten that nut, and then pretty much just tighten this till it clicks. There you go. Click. There you go. There's a click there. So that's the first pass for both of those. The second pass is to tighten them down another 60 degrees. I've torqued these to 67 foot-pounds. I have to add 60 degrees on the second pass. And if you take something like a carpenter's angle finder, you can start at 0 and make that parallel with your breaker bar, and then turn it till you get to 60, and that'll tell you about where you need to bring it to tighten it. So I'll do that, and then you spin that right to 60, and that means that now my breaker bar has to come around here. I can just make like a little mark on the wheel well with my finger and then just tighten it up. Here are the torque specs on those caliper mounting bracket bolts from the service manual. It's time to put the brake pads back in. You can see the old brake pad that fell off the backing plate. And I'll start with the hardware, the clips. And the lubrication points here are where the clips, where the brake pads slide on the clips. I will try not to get any of this on the rotor itself, but I might get a little bit on the rotor. I don't need a lot. And I'm just using the same silicone brake parts lubricant for this job too. It can do that double duty. And I know that some people put copper anti-seize onto the back side of their rotor so it doesn't seize to the hub, but mine was fine. I didn't add any. And so I'm also going to take a little bit and add it to the back side of the brake pad. Careful not to get it on the front of the brake pad. And the one with the little nub of the wear indicator goes toward the inside of the car. So I can just kind of pop that into place and then slide it forward. And then I'll do the same thing with this brake pad. Just put a little bit of silicone right there, and it looks a little light down there, so I'm just going to add some to the ears, and then there you go. Put the caliper back on. I want to clean this out. You shouldn't use brake parts cleaner right here. because that'll dry out the rubber seal. Chevy recommends you lubricate this with a little brake fluid, so .3 brake fluid. Also, at the end of this job, I'm going to check the reservoir on the brake fluid and make sure that I have enough. You don't have to open up the cap to compress this piston. The next step is to compress this piston down so we can get the brake pads in there. It might make things a little bit easier, but you don't have to do that. I have the piston cleaned out with brake fluid. I didn't want any kind of dust to get in there into the brake fluid. And I had to compress this piston all the way down so that the brake pads fit. And they make a piston compression tool, which I do not have. This one in the rear kind of works like a screw. It screws in as it compresses. And you see those nubs there. When you put the brake pad back in, they have to kind of align and engage with these nubs. So you have to compress this all the way down and make sure that those two nubs are kind of perpendicular to the rest of the caliper, so it'll engage those nubs. And since I don't have that tool, I'm going to fight this with some needle nose pliers. Not too hard, but it will take a little bit of time. All right, now let's bolt the caliper back on. Piston is compressed and lubricated. I'll take this slide pin bolt. I'll get that started. Then the dampener at the bottom. Get that started. I have my torque wrench set at 21 foot-pounds, 10 millimeters, and start cranking that down till it clicks. I feel a little resistance. Right there's a click. Then for the bottom bolt here, I don't have the kind of torque wrench that allows me to set this to 21 foot-pounds, so I'm just going to tighten it up. I have a feel for how tight that upper one was, so it's not much. That feels about good. Feels about the same. Okay. Here are the torque specs for the guide pin bolts from the service manual, if you want to pause the video. Cleaned out the back side of this wheel a little bit, took off that lug nut that was holding the rotor in place while it worked, and then I'm just going to put the wheel back on. So again, 19 millimeter. And it goes quickly if I use the impact gun to get it started. A 1/2 inch torque wrench, 19 millimeters, 100 foot-pounds. And again, just so that the wheel's not spinning. There's one. There's two. There's three. There's four. There's five. I'll get inside the car and compress that brake pedal down a few times till I feel some resistance, and then I'll know that the piston is pretty much now compressed down onto the brake pads, onto that new rotor. And then I'll drive around a little bit and brake in the rotor a little, just drive around, do some light braking on that rotor. Then from underneath the hood, I'll check the brake fluid reservoir. Looks like right about at the max in terms of fluid, so that looks good. That's it. Thank you.